CEO and owner of Sierra Detention Systems, which he founded in 1995. The company is headquartered in Brighton. Russ's company has installed integrated security systems for high-profile correctional and detention facilities like Supermax, Folsom Prison, Death Row in Terre Haute, Angola Death Row in Louisiana, and many others. The company's detention systems include a network of biometrics, closed-circuit cable TV systems, intercoms, duress alarms, touchscreen controls, and more. In other words, if you're a prisoner in one of his facilities where he's installed security, you're not getting out. Over the past 5 decades, Russ has been actively engaged in all aspects of the detention industry. He began as a laborer in 1966 during high school summers, where he found the work interesting. After graduation, he joined a manufacturing jail equipment company in San Antonio, where he ran the operations, engineering, and manufacturing departments. In 1977, he founded his own firm, invented and patented his own sliding door locking systems, which he marketed, manufactured, and installed to several state penitentiaries. He also invented and manufactured high-security fire-rated swinging door assemblies for jails and prisons. 13 years later, he sold his firm to join the Southern Steel Company. There, he led the research and development department and invented an entire line of updated sliding jail doors. In his career, and due to the nature of his business, he's had contact with several high-profile prisoners, such as Charles Manson, Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, Ted Kaczynski, Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, and others. On several occasions, he served as a consultant and expert witness in areas of detention equipment assessment, facility programming, and development. In 2018, he founded Sinclair Cybernetics, a firm that operates in parallel to Sierra and specializes in technical support of electronic locking systems and elements of cyber protection. On a personal note, in 2007, Russ and his wife Betty were honored as the Baylor University Parents of the Year during halftime ceremonies of the Baylor-Colorado football game in Waco, Texas. As you might imagine, Russ has unique perspective on our local and national prison systems. Please welcome Russ Pilcher.
Thank you for having me. Before we get into all this, what do you say we start having a little bit of fun, and let me take you on a trip to Louisiana and relate a story, since you guys are story people, about an adventure I had back in 1981-82. And it was a time when the Louisiana Department of Corrections was going through huge transitions. And things began to loosen up. The old Napoleonic Code was cited as old and antiquated and so forth and so on. Enter the new era of the modern warden for Louisiana. The typical Louisiana warden was more like a caricature of Boss Hogg, which you already know. But this time, we had a new one named Burl Cain. Burl Cain was the warden in Jackson, Louisiana. It was the state penitentiary right there for Dixon Correctional Center. And when I approached him with an unusual idea with one of my hobbies, he readily accepted. That hobby was one of ultralight planes where 2 or 3 of my friends would fly each Sunday. Dixon Correctional Center had an airstrip, literally for its own Con Air. It really did have Con Air, and it really does operate today. So one Sunday morning, about 10:30, we're at the end of the airstrip, and it's a little dicey. The weather's a little dicey. We decided, well, let's just hang for a bit. Let's figure out how long this is going to take. And as the day progressed, another hour or so, we began to warm up. And after it warmed up, then the buffeting and the gusting and all that sort of stuff began to settle down. So I decided, okay, it may be time. A little early, but I'm going to try it. So, if you're familiar with an ultralight, you know they're about 33 feet, 35 foot wingspan. They're aluminum frame, with a polyester cover that substitutes for wings. And this one, this particular one scared my wife to death from the moment she saw it, because it had a chainsaw motor as the power plant with a 33-inch prop. So it had a harness. It was slung from the king post, and you sat in this canvas harness. There were strings that went back to the back end of the plane. They were hooked to the rudder. So if you moved left, moved right, the plane went to the right because it would operate the rudder through a series of pulleys. So sitting on the end of the runway, and it's time. So taxi out to center of runway 15. This was a non-controlled airport. So putting on the Fred Flintstone brakes, you know what that is? You literally put your feet on the ground, squeeze the throttle, wind it up. When the RPM, the motor noise, and the prop noise began to resonate, you knew that was the time to let go. Picked up my feet, takeoff roll initiated. It doesn't take but about 150 to 200 feet for this craft to become airborne, because literally I am the heaviest part of it. It is an ultralight aircraft. So the wind buffeted a little bit, not bad. Headed up 50 feet, pretty good. 100 feet, pretty good. Speed began to climb, pretty good. 150 feet to 200 feet. Now it's time, and it's just time to hold it down a little bit. Make sure I get as much airspeed as I possibly can, because there's a side wind. So it's time now to lift off. I do. 50 feet, 75 feet. We know we need to get to about 300, 350 feet, because the warden would get upset, okay, if we buzzed his facility. A little bit of a timeout. The warden allowed us to do this because he used us as the inmates' entertainment on Sunday afternoon. Oh. For good behavior, they were rewarded with the ability to come to the yard and watch us and our antics with our planes in Sunday afternoon. And our flight plan that afternoon was to go around the prison, go over the yard and do the wing waggle and all that fun stuff, entertain them a bit, then go to the on an air tour to the Riverbend nuclear power plant that had just been commissioned a year prior. So I'm up, down, going back now to the story, going up about 150, 250 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. Everything is going well. I'm just sort of leaning into the wind a little bit because there's a little tail yaw. And that's not bad, but it's still climbing. Everything's going well. And then it happened. A monster gust hit me from the port side. Turned my wings perpendicular to the ground. Now you gotta have level flight in order to have sustained flight. 90 degrees. Now, since it was 90 degrees, my body fell too. That pulled the rudder to the right. Not only was I going down this way, I was headed down this way. That's what they call a suicide dive. So you'd be surprised how fast your mind can work when it needs to. My job at the time was to find a way to overcome that with this massive 7-horsepower motor and bring the aircraft into a sweeping kind of a turn and up. And if I could get that executed, I'll worry about getting altitude in a minute. I have to get that job done first. Well, it's working pretty well. As airspeed began to pick up, because I'm going down, the controls became a little bit more responsive, and the plane began to react and respond, and I'm at about a 15-degree attitude now with the wind. And I'm just about to pull out of this, and I realize, oh my, look there. I mentioned that nuclear power plant. 26,000 volt, high transmission wire. We're right there, nose to nose. I convinced myself at that moment that I was going to meet my maker. The first contact with that wire were the cables that wired the struts. They were stainless steel cables, meaning they conducted electricity very well. Knowing I was going to hit and not wanting to give up, I turned loose of the aluminum members and lifted my feet off the aluminum footrests and just, here we go. I hit it, blinding white light. The sparks, the explosions, all of those things that go on, the arcing, the smell of burnt electricity, the smell of burnt plastic, melted aluminum, instant, like that. These were high transmission wires, which meant the distance between the standards was like 500 feet, meaning the wires would dip like this, several of them, at 4 runs of them, or layers. I hit the middle two. So fast and so hot was that current that the king post that my harness was in melted before my forward motion was stopped. It melted. I found myself somersaulting back and forth, grabbing for whatever I could grab in midair, and flying without the plane. The plane, this wind still had the plane pinned up against the wires, going across 3 of the 4 strands. You can imagine the explosions and so forth. They measured the distance between the impact point and the muddy ground that I hit at 41 feet. I hit, I know I was stunned, I was out for a bit. I don't know how long, but it couldn't have been long, because as I finally came to and digging the mud out of my face and hands and our mouth and behind my helmet and off and getting lights that turned around and looked, the airplane was still running in the fuel that was in the line, so it wasn't very long at all that I had been out. I turned to see this light show that's going on behind me. The plane is just aglow, and all the wires are aglow, until one has had enough fire, electricity, shorting out, whatever, that it fell right next to me, hot, in the mud. When they tell you that electricity is expressed in waves, you see it on paper, that's how it really is in real life. Around me, all around me, were waves of white electricity, lightning, around. And then the current came through the dampness of the mud and hit me. Well, this was the second time I thought I was going to meet my maker, because I couldn't breathe. My entire body was just tensed. And it was so tensed I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't breathe. And I'm thinking, again, this is it. And then there was the large explosion. Biggest one yet, the transformer blew. It was on the pole. And when the transformer blew, it turned off the power. And when it turned off the power, I became aware of the inmates that were in the yard screaming, clapping, insults, laughing, hollering, and I couldn't make anything. I'm still trying to come out of this stunned stupor. Then I heard clearly, as though he was standing right here, "Burn, baby, burn!" Now what he was doing was making reference to the death house, which is about 1,000 feet north where the electric chair was, and he knew that we did that. So at that point, I began to get to a point where I could respond. So I did so without saying anything. I gave him a couple of signs, and you know the ones I'm talking about. And with that, the entire yard erupted in applause. He's a fighter! He's like us, he's a fighter! And from that point on, I never had to worry about safety. It was something explaining that to the warden. That's another story. He found another way to entertain the inmates after that. So, needless to say, my wife got me another set of golf clubs. So, I had a new habit.
Keep them away from the electric.
Yeah, yes. Let me tell you a little bit about Sierra and Sinclair. We, as Jim said, we design and manufacture and build detention equipment, things that are very, very durable. They're made out of steel, heavy-duty stainless steel, heavy-duty mild steel, cold rolled steel. Our doors were 2.5 inches thick. We bought blocks from other people and so forth, and our computers are the heaviest industrial type computers that are made. We operate our things through PLCs, programmable logic controllers. Most of this is a bunch of gobbledygook to me because I have to hire people who are brilliant. I'm not in that area. If you want me to temper some steel for you, I'm your man. But the computers and all the electronic component parts, we hire children. I call them children. They come in sandals. They're just out of college, and they don't know what they can't do. But we put these things together in accordance with all kinds of design specifications and installed them in over 400 jails all over the country, federal, state, whatever. And we've learned over the time that there's 2 ways to classify this, and we're going to speak about this tonight when we talk about the equipment in a particular cell. There's the hard side and the soft side. The hard side is that part that's made of steel. The traditional bars that you see on TV, the steel bunks, the steel doors, the steel locks, that, you know, all those heavy-duty accessories, even the steel ceilings, that's what we call the hard side. That's the dumb side. It doesn't have any intelligence to it. The soft side, just exactly the opposite. It is the computers that we spoke about, programmable logic controllers, the biometric readers, artificial intelligence, the if-then programming, what to do when, okay, and the control programming. So what we do with that is, imagine you have, this is a representation right here, an orthographic representation of the facilities we built downtown. Actually, we didn't do the general construction, we just did the electronics and hard side. This orthographic view represents the floors on the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse on Colfax, and right across the plaza is the Denver County Jail, our Justice Center. Our control center is, if you'll look, I don't know if my mouse is showing or not, I'll point it down here. This is the basement right here. Our control center is down here, and it is the nerve center that controls all of those floors and the 3D perimeter, or 3D envelope, if you will. If you walk in that area, on that plaza, within 50 feet of the backside of either of those facilities, and 50 feet above, we're looking at you. We know what you're doing, and we know where you're going, by your trajectory. We have analytics that will predict, to a small degree, excuse me, pardon me, I went to see my grandchildren, a little petri dishes. So we're able to see what you're doing and control those, and let's pull it into a cell block right here. This particular picture right here gives you an example of what it is that we control inside of the building. The one previous was outside of the building. And this row of cell blocks right here is considered the main level. This row is a mezzanine level, and we've shown them in 2D flat, so that you can know that this actually in real life stacks on top. We didn't put it that way pictorially, so that we could actually see what goes on in every cell and control every cell. The icons that you see here are utilities, intercom, door control, hand tilt zoom TV. Utility control right here is heat, cold. We have them illustrated, one hot, one cold. We can reintegrate with fire, public address systems, intercoms, closed circuit television, and anything else that the owner wants, meaning jail management systems, where the social and medical and legal visitation documentation takes place. All that's integrated into our system. And the, the officer has two choices. He can operate it what we call direct supervision, which is from a desk that would be put in here directly inside of the cell block with the inmates, or from central control down in the basement, some distance away. Everything is totally redundant, and everything is to a point where we have total voice control and total master control in any sort of emergency that has been at least identified in the last 50 years. So if there is a fire, our protocols tell the inmates or tell the officers, these doors are automatically locked, the fire's over here, that these doors are locked, you can't go over there, here's your escape route. An automatic line comes up on this graphic right here and shows them the way to go. We pool them in day rooms to keep them safe but secure, while the fire department does their business on the other side. A little bit of information about hard side, a little more info on what it looks like. This is a Supermax prison. We did the Supermax electronics and locking systems some years ago. And as I look at this one, this is an example of grading bar right there. It's hard side. This is a 2.5-inch wall panel. It's hard side. The lavatory and the toilet, in this particular case, that's lavatory toilet combination. This is the entertainment center. Don't get carried away with that. That's not really what it means in the way we normally think. That means it's got a plug in. In the Supermax, they decided to go ahead and pour the bunks out of concrete. And they decided to grace them with a 2-inch mattress and one blanket. The pillow is built into the mattress, and they're not allowed a separate pillow. Supermax is a place where there's many buildings there, but there's only one part where these lovely people stay or stayed. Jim mentioned their names already. This one's Chapo. This one right here is Omar Governor. You remember Lagoyevich?
He's here in town, isn't he?
He is now. Yes, he was. There's the blind sheikh, Abdul. That's a 911 planet right here. Remember the Murrah building, Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh? He's no longer with us because he was executed by the government. He's down there now. And this is Charles Manson, who's finally passed away. He was in Folsom and San Quentin. They moved him around a lot so that he wouldn't entrance the officer. He had a reputation for that. Now I'd like to take you to let's skip a slide here. A place where we can talk about prisons. I want to run a little tape for you. I think we have volume here about the general condition and attitude that we have toward prisons and what the reaction is. This will be about 3 minutes.
Good morning, John. It's Friday. A few weeks ago, a company called Visually emailed me and was like, hey, Hank, if you could do a high-quality animated video on any issue in the world, what...
Let's see if I can get the volume down a little bit. It doesn't adjust here. Is there another volume adjustment?
It's fine.
The volume's good? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get back to the previous. Here we go.
morning, John. It's Friday. A few weeks ago, a company called Visually emailed me and was like, hey Hank, if you could do a high-quality animated video on any issue in the world, what would you choose? Now that was a hard choice, but I went with incarceration in America because it is messed up. Now crime is also messed up. Bad things happen to good people, and that's terrible, and something should be done about it. But we send people to prison to be punished, and to prevent them from doing bad things again, and to deter others from breaking the law. Punishment, corrections, and deterrence. Now, we have this habit of thinking of prisoners as something very external to society. After all, there are literal walls between them and society, walls capped with razor wire and watched over by people with guns. But millions of prisoners are released each year. Today's prisoners are tomorrow's neighbors, so corrections should probably be the most important piece of the incarceration pie. Unfortunately, it is not. We are, however, really good at punishment. America has about 4% of the world's people and about 25% of the world's incarcerated people. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Over the last 30 years, that number has skyrocketed, increasing over 400%. 41% of American juveniles and young adults have been arrested by the time they turn 23. Children as young as 13 years old have been sentenced to die in prison. And our prisons violate international standards. Solitary confinement increases instability and violence in inmates and is considered by international law to be torture. But in America, it's not regulated by anyone except the prison officials. No judge, no jury. Arguably the most devastating form of punishment we enact in this country, and yet there is no appeals process. And you think it's hard to get a job in America? Well, we make it intentionally more difficult to get a job once you have a conviction on your record, not to mention just to live your life. Convicts are ineligible for welfare, student loans, public housing, food stamps, and are often socially disconnected from community and family support structures. So in addition to having high recidivism rates, they have very high rates of homelessness and suicide. Somewhere along the way, we started to think that being tough on crime meant being tough on criminals, but that's not the same thing. Punishment is only one piece of a much larger crime reduction pie. And it's an expensive one, with some institutions paying more than $100,000 per year per prisoner. Long prison sentences have helped to decrease crime, but no more than 25% of the decrease we've seen can be attributed to incarceration, and it costs far beyond just dollars. The cost is to people, to our country, to communities, to families, and to ourselves. The policy seems to be, if you committed a felony, we just give up on you. These wars on crime, wars on drugs, they are wars on people. The smart political move is to appear tough on crime because crime is scary, so we increased minimum sentences, we arrested more people, we sent more of them to prison. That's how we looked tough on crime, but the results are in its bad policy. It's cruel, it's short-sighted, and to continue this policy of mass incarceration would be foolish. We're living inside of a massive $75 billion per year failed experiment. 2010 was the first year in nearly 40 years that the number of incarcerated individuals in America did not increase. Policymakers are beginning to realize the magnitude of this failure, but there is a long way to go. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Sounds like I'm trying to talk myself out of a job there, but the truth is, it's going the wrong direction.
Good morning, John. It's Friday.
Sorry. And I can bore you to sleep with charts and graphs and statistics and so forth and so on. But you heard a comment there that 2010 was the very first time it looked like it might want to, I want to go back to right there. And for another time, we could talk about what happened here to here, where crime rate went up. We can talk about the Great Society and the welfare program and so forth and so on for another talk. But the point I want to make right now is they say that it's tailing off, and it actually is because we count crime differently. We wake up and said, you know what? We can't afford this, and you've seen it now. We're releasing those nonviolent people, and maybe they should be. I'm not taking a position on it, but what I am about to tell you is not fun. 4 out of 10 juveniles are arrested in our society now, for one thing or another. 2 out of 10 actually serve time in some sort of juvenile facility. The time bomb that we are building right now with our youth will take this downturn and make it go to this slope again inside of 10 years. Our answer to this seems to be typical in federal response. It must be a mental health problem. And while there are cases to be made for that, that's not all of the problem. But we're content at this point to hack at the branches of the problem rather than get to the root of it. That's another time. We went to Louisiana on a little trip. We came back to Denver, showed you what Sierra and Sinclair does. I'd like to take you on another trip now. And since you're writers, let's make this interactive, and let's see if we can have a little bit of fun on a very, very, very serious subject. Fun as in interaction, not making fun of this because it is very serious. In the next few moments or minutes, I'm going to show you a couple of slides, maybe 3 or 4. 2 of them may be disturbing, so I want to tell you now. And it's just a typical, viewer discretion disclaimer that I'm issuing. And it'll come to you here pretty quick about what the subject matter is. Anybody recognize 10 South, the term 10 South? Metropolitan Correctional Center, Federal Bureau of Prisons, suicide cell. Continue, Epstein. Okay, that's where he died. And as writers, there's 2 or 3 ways to look at this, maybe 10, I don't know, but as a dry old jail guy, when Jim asked me to come and talk about this, I thought, well, statistics aren't going to do it. Maybe we can find something a bit more interesting, and hopefully you will ask a lot of questions that I might have some answers to. The premise that we want to talk about here is, was there a conspiracy or not? Was it a pure suicide, or was the man killed? And there are many, many theories on it. And what I hope to do tonight is to play your technical consultant. And Jim was a little too generous in my introduction. Yeah, I do expert witness work, and yes, I've been trained to do some things inside of this and unpack stuff, do a little forensic work on how things broke and how things make malfunction and what the policies and procedures are. You spend 50 years in something and you learn some routines. You know how federal policies work, you know how procedures inside of jails work. You know how suicide protocols operate, what they should be doing, and what they actually do. So, you're the writer, and I'm your consultant. Okay? And for those of you who feel like and are already convinced that it was just a mere suicide and it's finished business, then you can come back to Denver and find another subject. For those of you who think, well, there might be something here, maybe we should look a little deeper to see what happened. Something to think about. So with that in mind, I want to show you what a suicide cell looks like. This is an upper and a lower bunk with no sharp edges. Everything has been rounded. You see the ladder? The ladder has a solid back, meaning you can't put a sheet through it and tie it around it. It's solid. Look down here at the very bottom. You can barely see it right here. All this is closed off. That's a towel hook up there. It will hold a dry towel. You towel off, it breaks away under the weight of the moisture that's in the towel. You have to put it over 2 of them. There are no sharp edges, no ledges to tie anything to at all. And when you're in there with paper clothes. You're not given a jumpsuit, you're in there with paper clothes. Those that just tear away. You're given paper sheets. you're not given a pillow. The floor itself, depending on the facility, can be padded. Some of the walls can be padded. In this particular case, what I'd like to be able to do is fill you in with what we know, okay? And then once you, if you're reminded to say, well, you know, I think it was a conspiracy, then we can banter about some questions about what might have happened. And then I will give you a little warning too, before I start showing you some of this more graphic slides. Metropolitan Correctional Center are also known as, AKA, they say, 10 South Manhattan, is run by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But all these things I'm about to tell you are not up for debate, they're just matter of fact, and they create the backstop, or backdrop rather, for the issues we want to address. It's held El Chapo, it's held Whitey Bulger. Remember Whitey Bulger, the notorious guy who was transferred to West Virginia and beaten to death over there? He survived this group. This particular facility is accredited by the ACA. The ACA is the American Correctional Association. That is the association that promulgates and distributes rules and regulations and good practices. And they have a grade. They go in and inspect your facility, and they give you a letter grade. This one got an A. It does also come under the Bureau of Prisons' purview, and they have their own guidelines, their own regulations. Minimum number of cameras, for example. Cameras have been a big point of discussion here. They don't have cameras on the inside of the cell because of the shower in there, and they feel like the inmate has privacy, rights to privacy when they shower, and occasionally, not all the time, when they use the restroom, inside of the cell. But the layout of the cameras on the outside of the cell is specifically regulated. One this way and one this way on the ceiling. They have them looking opposing views so that this one can see underneath the blind spot that this one has, and vice versa. There's also 2 officers stationed outside of the door. The door itself has a big observation panel in it, like this, so that the officers don't have to get up from their chairs, they just gaze in to see the welfare of the inmate. Generally, there are 2 bunks rather, like this, you see. They put a person who has attempted suicide in their record, or one that they fear is going to attempt suicide, with one who has not or does not have those tendencies. The logic being that would probably sound an alarm and knock on the door, get someone's attention, hit the intercom that we talked about earlier, you saw on the other side. I mean, on the other graphic that I showed you. I said earlier, you have paper clothes, paper sheets. The warden at the time was Warden Lemaine Ndai, N''D''A', D''A', Ndai. The warden here apparently got real shy and he was transferred by Bureau of Prisons right after this, and he's out of contact with everyone. He's not available for comment. In fact, when newspapers decided to look for him, they tried to find his image on the internet, and all of his images have been taken down. No one can find a picture on the internet of this war, not even a personnel picture. Epstein was in that cell with a particular person on his first attempt. And this is his cellmate, that is his actual cellmate. This is Nicholas Tartaglione, a former undercover cop from Westchester, who is obviously in shape, facing the death penalty for killing 4 drug dealers, and a drug deal gone bad. He has not been sentenced. Now, the reason that might be relevant, because I'm just your technical consultant, you're going to do the investigation, is that he had not been sentenced and therefore might be looking for a deal to do someone's bidding. And we know without dispute that Epstein had an attempt on his own life. And he had the marks to prove it, and this was his settlement. This is now where, if you want to look away or if you want to leave, this is your chance. Epstein somehow was either successful or was murdered, and this is him on the gurney as the paramedics were trying to resuscitate him. Several things come up, several things come up about that, and that is, who took the picture?
Good question.
Why?
Warden deny.
Sorry?
Warden and I.
Yeah.
Why did not the officers who discovered him start resuscitation? Because this is an ACA accredited facility. All the equipment, excuse me, all the equipment that paramedics have is just around the corner. And this is the first attempt at resuscitation.
Oh my gosh.
Now, we have a close-up here. And what's remarkable about this, from an old jail hack, is there's a braided skin up here.
Yeah.
And there's blood here. And supposedly, this was a hanging with a full sheet. We didn't have full sheets, we had paper sheets. Why would there be damage to the face and about the ear there? I'll go back and get that out there. When that starts. The next thing that we look at is, where are the officers? The ones that were supposedly on guard. What we learned there is they too have been transferred. They're out of touch. They're out of reach. One wasn't even an officer. Why would you have an officer that didn't have any experience assigned to the most critical area of your facility? And then an officer who was there, who was a junior officer, had qualified, he was qualified. They were there together. Their excuse was they went to sleep for 3 hours. The protocol is that they look through that window or go to that door once every 30 minutes. Now, it only takes 5 minutes to hang yourself before you lose consciousness. That assumes that you have tools to do so. You've heard about the cameras, maybe, if you've listened to this. The cameras were malfunctioned. Well, a guy like me would say, all right, so, cameras malfunction, that's why we have work. We have maintenance contracts to keep cameras working. So, where is the required paperwork that says, what a tag out is? When something malfunctions, you tag it out. It's a part of a documentation process. It literally has a tag. I'm running long, I know. Okay. No tag out. No log. In what we showed you in my big cell block graphic, the brains of that system logs every keystroke, every event, every alarm, every occurrence that happens in that jail is on a piece of paper, a long roll of paper. No maintenance tag out, no malfunction reported in the log for the camera. In fact, one of the cameras was turned toward the wall.
And isn't it, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah, no, this is interactive.
Isn't it way up on the top too? I mean,
It's on the ceiling. Generally, it's a 9-foot ceiling in those areas. You want a 9-foot ceiling as opposed to an 8-foot ceiling there so that people can't reach up and grab things.
so then
It's
someone
out of
had to
reach.
have a ladder to do that? I mean,
You
like,
have to have a ladder.
Yeah.
So someone either moved the desk over underneath the camera and turned it around, or someone had that, or for some reason or another, that was done intentionally. Cameras are anchored, they don't move.
Wouldn't the camera have caught the person moving it?
It could have, there are ways around that. If there is cooperation with the control room, where all of the controls are, you can log the camera down and it turns black. The screen turns black. You can say don't record here because you have control of that in the control room. You do whatever you need to do and it comes back up. Yes?
Is there a record of that?
Yes, there is. And yes, they found a black spot there.
They did find out.
They did find a black spot. Now, the question then becomes, for a control officer, that officer who is actually operating the control or nerve center of the jail cannot get on that system unless he logs on. He has a unique username and a unique password. That entire system was jumped. We don't know who was in that control room. Because
Excuse me, you said the entire system was what?
jumped.
Jumped,
Just-
okay.
Disabled. Sorry, jail term. Disabled.
Yeah.
And it had been disabled for weeks. Actually, 2 weeks. The 2 weeks that we're talking about was from the first attempt through the second attempt. We have this big cellmate. We don't know if he did anything or not. We do know that they won't allow him to be interviewed either. He's been tucked away, yes.
Was it recording everywhere except there?
Yes,
Or-
this was the only malfunction in the facility that was reported.
So everything else was working fine except here?
Yes.
And was it padded or was it just all concrete so he could have been slammed up against the wall or something?
His cell is concrete.
It was concrete.
It's concrete, and you remember the bunk, where is it? The bunk is steel. There it is. He could have been slammed against the ladder that you see there, or the top bunk occurs right about here.
Right.
Okay, so he could have been slammed against that. Any other questions? I think I went really long.
Where do they think the sheet came from?
We have 10 minutes.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Where do they think the sheet came from that he supposedly?
Unknown at this time. Unknown. We do know that all the sheets for all the facilities come from what they call stores. So an area of the facility, kind of like a warehouse. There's the food storage over here, and expendable storage like cleaning supplies, and then there's the laundry storage and some other things that they have. The whole area is called stores. It was a prison issue sheet, and should not have been there.
And he hung himself on the shower head or something, or what did he hang himself on?
Well, we're trying to find out.
Well, they don't know.
Since it can't go through the ladder, and it won't hang on the towel hook, and there's no doorknob on the inside of the door. It's a round. It's an oval, like if you were to turn a bowl upside down and put it there, that's what the inside of the doorknob looks like. So you can't put anything on it, it won't catch it, it just slides off. Everything else has got a taper top on it, and there's nothing to wrap anything around. What you're looking at here is through the door. That's the handrail and the stairwell, so that's not inside the cell. We'll make sure I'm clear there.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, but did they have cameras in the hall?
They do.
Because then they would be able to see who was coming and going.
Those are the
and-
two that were malfunctioned and turned away.
Oh, it wasn't
Yes.
inside the cell at all.
That was, no, there's no.
Not even at the bed or anything in there, they left that all.
For inmate privacy, the ACLU made sure that that was,
Oh,
taken out of there.
God, it's so obvious.
We have as a standard, cameras in medical cells, okay, because of the concern over people taking advantage during diagnosis. And also in strip search cells. We have cameras there, but those have certain regulations around them that surround their usage.
But not the suicide cells.
Why would the warden have participated in this? What did he gain? Is there anything he gained that you can find? Like money deposited in the Caymans or?
Well, it's a little early right now. Okay, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has this inmate, Nicholas, here, stashed away, the two officers stashed away, and the warden stashed away, and also the lieutenant. The lieutenant, okay, in charge of this particular area, I haven't spoken about him yet. He too is stashed away, but he is the guy, okay, that's in charge of that particular area. And the lieutenant in charge of we call them zip codes, for the lack of a better term. Blocks, zip codes, and we can't find him either. He's the guy for the
You say you can't find these people, but then on the other hand, you say Bureau of Prisons hasn't stashed away.
Northwest,
You know.
I think it's the Northwest office, the Northwest.
So you know where they are, you just don't have
They
access.
know where they are, but we can't find them for interview.
Okay, you don't have access to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Who's not getting access to the interview then?
Anyone,
Anyone.
not even attorneys. Okay, the Epstein's attorney wanted access to them and can't get it.
So my question, I mean, conspiracies are great for us as writers. I mean, they make great material. I tend to be pretty dubious of this
Good.
on a real life basis. And the reason, one of the biggest things I always have trouble with in conspiracy theories is there's almost always, well, by its nature, conspiracy involves multiple people. You're talking about, and you've been in a lot of prisons and a lot of jails, to pull off something like this, if somebody actually killed him, there's got to be, how many people?
6.
That's it. And
You
they're
can
all
buy as few as 6. You still have 6 people.
You got 6?
You have
And they're
6
all
people who
hidden
have to
away.
go along
They're
with
the
it.
ones who aren't talking.
They're the ones hidden
I know
away.
that, but my point is convincing 6 people and keeping 6 people silent over any period of time, whether it's a few months or a couple of years or whatever, that's asking a lot.
It's a very tall order.
Right.
It is.
So, but you feel that in this situation, there would have been 6 people minimum to pull this off, whatever was pulled off, however it was done.
If they did it, yeah.
If they did it, you needed 6 people, and that's a minimum number?
No, I think that's all you need.
You think that's all you need? We're talking about a prisoner who's with him, and then...
No, actually, the suicide happened when he was by himself. The first time this inmate right here
Yeah.
was his cellmate during the first attempt. There were 2 attempts, or 2 episodes.
Right.
The second episode, he died, but he was in the cell by himself. So you'd have the 2 officers who went to sleep.
So why would this prisoner, if he was not there on this, quote, successful attempt,
Yes.
but he was around in the first attempt,
Correct.
is there some belief that the first attempt was not really an attempt?
The rumor is circulating that since he had not been sentenced, he was facing the death penalty, that he was commissioned to do the deed.
Oh, wow.
He didn't do a good job. That's what the rumor is. And they had to go do it a second time. And in between these 2 episodes, Epstein would pay his attorney the regular going rate to come and sit with him and just be with him. So he could have as much safe time. That's what their attorney said, or Epstein's attorney. And in all these prisons, you can have there are only 2 categories. You can have unlimited visitation time. One is your attorney, one is your spiritual advisor. They can stay with you in unlimited amount of time. And he made them stay as long as they could stand. After the first episode.
Now, I assume at this point, I mean, what sort of speculations do we have? I mean, I kind of mean in general when that immediately when that occurred, there was oh, this guy was killed, you know, these people, or this person had reason to do it. I mean, do you have any sense of who they, I mean, those who think this in fact was a murder, who ordered that?
Who would be behind it?
Yeah.
Any number of 3,000 people, because he was black.
No, I know there were a lot of people, but you would have to rule out a lot of people, because how many people actually would have the wherewithal to get 6 people in a prison system to commit that kind of crime?
Oh, well.
I mean, that would be a major question to me.
It'd be a major question, but not a major feat. Life in these facilities, I'm talking about the maximum security facilities, is cheap. It's not held in that regard at all. I have videos I can show you right now about the California riots. I've got them on this machine. We can do it now or later, another time, where gangs come together because one guy on the outside said, he just got here, I don't want him there. Ordering actions inside a prison is not as difficult as you know.
But you're ordering actions of officers. I mean, I understand gangs, and you know, that's, or a particular hit within a prison because of whatever. But we're talking, for this, we're talking about all officers in the facility.
No, we don't know that. And here's why we don't know that. Remember the officer that was not an officer?
Yeah.
There were 2 guys there. One was just qualified. He was an officer, to your point. The other one was not. We don't know what his reason for being there is. And they've got him to close like this.
But there's been a couple of coroners who've come out publicly saying that the marks on his neck don't coincide with what it would look like if he had hung himself.
The first one especially, because the first one supposedly did have a regular sheet, okay, that was issued to him, but he had ligature marks, sharp and well-defined, narrow ligature marks on his neck. They call them bruises, that are not consistent with a broad sheet. Okay. The second one, the private forensic physician said, wait a minute, there are 4 broken bones in this man's neck. You don't do that with a sheet. It's just manual strangulation that actually breaks those bones. And you have to have significantly more pressure than it takes to just cut off the wind. In order to break those bones, you really have to have a
Was that with the first one?
That was the second.
That was the second one, had the bones and the, yeah.
I'm getting, I'll stay here as long as you guys want.
I-
My wife is telling me,
It's actually 9 o'clock and we need to wrap it up because Nate has to go home. We may have to have you back again.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting. I want to hear about all these guys that you met in prison too, like
well,
crazy
there's
dancing.
stories around all of them. The purpose, okay, from the core purpose for getting into that part of it was, as a guy who's been in the prison business for a long time, I'm able to report accurately about cameras, how they work, locks, how they work, how suicide cells are constructed, what they contain, what they don't, the things you can do in there, the things you cannot do in there, because they've been subjected to decades of testing, which I've been part of some of these testing. The exterior stuff about who worked what can do.
Can I ask a question? Do you think he was murdered?
I'm going to wait another week before I say that. I'm leaning that way. And I'm waiting on 2 things specifically. One is the federal judge to order the Federal Bureau of Prisons to allow access to all these players and to see what the reports are there. Federal Bureau of Prisons, I failed to mention this. There was one camera that was recording. They say that the footage was unusable. That was the term given to it. We don't know what the term unusable means. Could have been something out of focus. Someone actually manually screwed up the focus on the lens and the camera. It could have been, it showed something it shouldn't, or anything in between. But when we have access to those staff members, if they use the right interrogators, it won't take 3 or 4 days before they all know the story. So,
Well,
too many coincidences, so that's what makes me lean this way.
thank you. We need to thank you for your time. And